So just take it as live now, and we're just talking until it's confirmed. No swearing or anything like that at this time of the morning.
I've done, throughout lockdown, done a lot of these things, and I couldn't actually figure out the difference or the way to start a session where the presenters could talk but not let the attendees in yet. And I
Yes.
ended up realising that halfway through me talking to the other presenters to kind of prep them, there was about 15 people waiting there.
Oh
And I
no.
thought, oh, okay, they've all been on silent and heard the whole chat. So, okay.
Well, I hope there's not been 15 people waiting now because we are live. So that's fantastic. Welcome to everyone who has joined us this morning for day 2 of our Crafty Distillers Conference. We had a marvellous day yesterday. We had some great talks and some really, really lovely people on, and lots of engagement and questions and comments, which was absolutely brilliant. So thoroughly enjoyed that. But now here we are on day 2. And we are starting today with what I think is a very important subject for distillers to be learning about. I'm going to open up the live Q&A quickly, which will take just a jiffy. And by all means, start ploughing those questions in. So today's talk is on, we keep calling this R&D tax credits, but there's a bit more to it than that. So R&D is research and development. And my guest here today, Karen, I'm just going to let her introduce herself firstly, if you'd like to take it away, Karen.
Thanks, Bernie. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen McFadden. I'm an associate director with a company called Catax, based in Glasgow in Scotland. So I don't know how many of you have joined from north of the border, but over pandemic, I've pretty much spoken to companies all across the UK, Isle of Man, Isle of Wight, everywhere. So it's been quite an eye-opener the last year. But I basically talk about tax breaks, in particular research and development. And I'm really lucky. I love my job. It's a really fun topic to talk about, regardless of the sector, whether it's breweries, construction, architects, tech. The concept can actually be put to any sector. So, yeah, I'm just here to sort of answer the questions on the presentation that I put out. Don't be scared to ask any questions. There's no stupid questions. R&D isn't just straightforward. It can be quite grey. So yeah, I'm just here to offer some advice on the topic. And even if it's not something that you're eligible for right now, it's good to learn about it so you can educate your team for moving forward and projects in the future. So it's just to kind of learn about it and see what you can pick up.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. So yeah, essentially, this is ways, if you have this information and you're doing what needs to be done, you can essentially look at getting, assistance with money towards things and money back that can help you with your projects. Hence, it's a really important topic. Nobody wants to miss out on money they could have to help further their business. So yeah, I'm really keen for people to get some questions in. In the interim, I hope we get started. Would you be able to? I know it's quite hard to surmise the video that you did previously, but would it be okay to maybe cover just some base points just to get things started with what we're looking at?
Yeah, of course, of course. Well, long story short, the legislation is all about HMRC rewarding limited companies in the UK. Now, you're getting rewarded because you're showcasing to HMRC that you are being innovative somehow. Now, innovation, that word kind of gets thrown around. What you find innovative might be totally different to what HMRC find.
Yes.
So I just sort of tend to give a few snapshot examples of what innovation for R&D looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, within your company, if you're doing R&D, it comes in 3 forms: either new product development, which I imagine will pretty much hit the box on everybody listening, new beers, new recipes, new recipe innovation, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're bringing something brand new to the market, first of its kind, it's not been done before, new product development is quite obvious research and development activity. The second area that qualifies is advancing something that's already out there.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where, gin isn't a new concept, whiskey's not a new concept, craft beer isn't new. I imagine a lot of the products that you guys actually make, it's not new to the market, but you're wanting to make it better, or you want to make it more nutritionally efficient, or you want to make it You know, say you want to make it sweeter with using less sugar, or you basically want to improve it somehow. You want to push the boundaries of what the product is right now in the market. And by doing so, you know, you typically have to experiment. You know, you're not going to get it right first time. You might decide, I mean, you know, one of my clients in Dundee, the Dundee Gin Company, they wanted to make a marmalade gin. You can't just put jars of marmalade in glass bottles and think it's going to taste nice. You know, you have to go through a phased, you know, elimination of ingredients, or a phased process. So that's typically where you're looking at the market and saying, right, this is what exists. I want to make it better. How do I do that? That's innovation. And then thirdly, that gets missed quite a lot is called process innovation. So again, if you imagine two breweries, they want to do the exact same craft beer. It's going to look the same. It will be labeled the same. It will taste the same. It will, you know, cost the same. You might think, do you know what? I'm not really doing anything different then, because the guy next door is doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
But actually, HMRC understand trade secrets. Okay, they understand that you aren't actually going to follow the same trial and test phase as the guy next door. You might have a whole new concept of how you're going to approach this new product. So it's not like you phone each other up and say, oh, listen, how did you manage to get, you know, this ingredient to merge with that one? Because we just didn't know how to do it. Or, you know, how did you manage to get the bitter taste out of it? Because we tried this and that, and it just didn't work. You know, you're not actually phoning each other up and exchanging those secrets. So the fact that you have to come up with your own process, your own behind the scenes workings, that can be considered innovation. So, you know, it's I kind of think three areas that your work must fall into somewhere if it comes to R&D. But you know, the main concept will always come back to, first of all, how difficult is it to do? If you can open up a brewery book and it gives you 1 to 10 steps on how to do what you're trying to do, and it works, well, you've not done R&D. You've just followed a list of instructions. You've followed a recipe that's worked a million times over, you know, and you've produced something that I could produce if I went into your sector.
Yeah.
R&D, you know, is the opposite, where you look at the book and you go, okay, I'll throw that out the window because that's not helpful. Or, you know, you're looking at the book and you're saying, well, I can follow steps 1 to 5, but I'm trying to make this, you know, calorie free. So nothing tells me from step 5 onwards how to do that. You know, so that's we'll come back to how difficult was it. And another one that HMRC want you thinking about is something called, ready for it, it's called technological uncertainties.
Ooh.
So yeah, very jargony for long story short, that is sort of when you approach a project, if you know that what you want is 100% going to work, and it's been tried and tested, and there's no doubt that it's going to come out the other end perfect, well, there's no R&D there. Because if you're 100% sure and you're 100% certain, then there's no experimentation there. There's no risk involved. There's no humming and hawing over, is this going to work or not? So, you know, that's not considered R&D. The opposite is, where you've actually gone, right, I would like to make a beer that tastes of strawberries, using no strawberry additives and a whole punnet of strawberries in each can. How on earth do I do that without getting the pips in it, without making it too sweet, without getting it, you know, too sticky? How do I actually do that? The fact that you're asking how questions, that's the stuff that you want to be, you know, applying to your R&D projects.
Nice. I think that's a really good description. And for anybody out there questioning, you know, I think that's a really good answer for them. So thank you so much for that. David's actually sent in a question already this morning, and he's asked, do you know of any examples, not asking who, of people being turned away for not being innovative enough? So I suppose you've kind of covered some of that in what you said, but is there any examples in particular where somebody's done a certain thing thinking it was and then maybe it wasn't?
Absolutely. And that's the whole point of getting advice from a specialist. You know, always, whoever you're going to speak to in this sector, we should be wanting to give you advice on what does work and what doesn't, and what HMRC wants to see. Because essentially, if we were to put through something that HMRC don't approve of, then we're really jeopardising that claim and we're jeopardising our own name. So, there have been examples where we sit down with clients and they've explained a situation to us, from the outset, and we think, oh God, yep, R&D all over that. That sounds absolutely brilliant. And then when it comes down to the nitty gritty, it actually turns out that the formula they picked up from previous recipes that have worked 100%. Or the machinery that they've used, maybe they've talked about this really cool production line that they've created, and they use the word created, but actually they've bought off the shelf machinery and they've just lined them up next to one another. And all of the pieces of machinery have done what they were intended to do. There was no kind of engineering to merge them together. There was no tweaks to go, well, these two machines have never spoke to each other before. How is that going to work? There's none of that going on. It literally was I've bought a kettle, I want to boil water. What was your uncle that? I boiled water.
Yeah.
And they think that they've created something fantastic because they've managed to boil water into a plastic cup, instead of a glass one or whatever.
Yeah.
So yes, there are examples. Again, we will sit down and they might have created something that they think, they think a lot of a misconception in this sector actually is flavour innovation gets thrown around quite a lot. Someone who might make a pink gin might think, oh, well, we've made a pink gin, that's innovative. Playing around with flavours isn't innovative, okay? Because there's loads of, on the shelf, there's loads of strawberry, orange flavour, elderflower, there's loads of flavours out there. It's more the behind the scenes process and how you get that flavour right. That's R&D work. So like I said there, the marmalade example, essentially in each bottle of marmalade gin, there was a full glass jar of marmalade that had been put into each bottle. Now, making it called marmalade gin is not the innovation. The innovation is how did you actually get sticky, gloopy, thick texture into a food format? And when it came out the other end, how did you make sure the texture was correct? The volume was correct, the taste was correct, it wasn't too sweet, all these, how did you manage to do it? I remember when I first started at Catax, very new to the sector, but I thought the best way to explain R&D was by saying HMRC don't care about the first man that landed on the moon, they care about what brought him there. How did he get there? They care about the rocket ship that took him there. Walking on the moon, any man could do it, but how do you actually get them there is the question. And that was where the R&D was. So, creating a craft gin, craft beer or whatever it may be, putting it on the shelf, plenty of competitors do it, but how do you actually get the product perfect to put on the shelf? That's the question.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's a really, really good answer. So essentially, if somebody was looking at putting maybe a botanical into their gin that's not been used before because it's difficult to distill for whatever reason, they've had to think of a different way of doing it to get it in there for it to work. So something like that would count, right? Because they've had to do it differently, basically.
For sure, yeah.
Nice. I have a question here, an anonymous question. Would innovative packaging qualify? Ultraviolet labels or new sustainable source, e.g. packaging spirits in cans, etc.?
Oh, well, this is actually a really interesting topic because HMRC, the whole concept of pushing boundaries in your field is that you're showcasing to revenue and customs that you're advancing something, and advancing the waste sector and the reusable sector and recycling and improving the economy. That's a big topic. So any way that you can show, sorry for that noise in the background, we are in Glasgow, so you just as casual background noise.
Ambient sound.
The fun never stops. Wait for that to pass by.
No, don't you worry.
There we are. We're happy to save people up here, most of us. So ultimately, when it comes to using this stuff in your packaging, again, you want to come back to the question, have I just bought this off the shelf? Has someone else developed this product and I'm now using it? Even though you've bought it in bulk and you've slapped your label onto it, essentially is the core product already existing. And if it isn't already existing, or part of it's existing, and you've had to buy something as a foundation to work off of, and then you've had to, re-engineer, or you've had to, test a theory, If this new product is going to work, if it's going to be sustainable enough, then yeah, because that's you coming back to an experimental phase. In fact, I'm sure if I can think about it, it was a client of mine who had developed some dog food. And this was a while ago now, so I'm just trying to remember exactly, but there was innovation in the packaging, because essentially the weight of a standard bag could only carry, say, I don't know, 50 grams of something. But this client wanted to put more in a bag, but because of the texture of the dog food, it couldn't seep through. But it wanted it to be completely plastic free. So obviously we're looking at paper, or a plastic alternative product. So first of all, he has to figure out, well, is the weight and capacity going to be okay? And obviously, if it's more volume in the bag, is it going to be able to sit on the shelf as long? So the shelf life thing comes into play. And the fact that it was a non-plastic product, is it going to burst? Is it going to disintegrate? Is it going to be able to stay in the cupboard for as long as a plastic can would?
Yeah.
So, again, these questions come up, and it all came back to the uncertainty. I'm not sure if this will work 100%, so let's do some tests on it.
Yes. Yeah, that's fair enough. I'm thinking here, and I get a terrible thinking face when I think really hard. If this question is what I think it is, I can't remember the exact details. But what somebody has done is essentially used a can to distribute a product that's not normally done by can at all. It's not been done by can before, essentially. So the idea of that is it makes it it's inherently more sustainable to how it was being done, but likewise, it is just buying a can. So where does that sit when you're using an existing item, but you're using it to do something differently? Does that make sense?
Oh, it does make sense, yeah. So what's the reason for it never being done in a can before? There must be a reason for it.
I think it just hasn't. It's just other ways, but I don't want to go too much into it. I don't know if I'm allowed to say or not. But I think essentially it's been being done other ways, and nobody's really thought, let's do it that way. And somebody's gone, oh, actually, that's going to be a better way for sustainability with the way it's recycled and everything, and the weight and stuff. So somebody thought to do it like that, and that's the better.
So let's say you've decided, okay, no one's really thought of it in the marketplace for some weird reason. I've now I'm going to use cans. If you purchase the cans off the shelf and the product sits in the can absolutely perfect, there's no issues. Simply, you're just replacing a bottle with a can, and there's no risk there. There's no problems with it. There's no issues. Then there's no R&D. You are literally just substituting one product for another.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. No risk, because there's a few things to consider, isn't it? It's doing something differently, but it is also the risk factor. So you can be innovative but still play it safe, and therefore you wouldn't qualify. You need to be kind of putting something at risk.
Absolutely, you need to be advancing something, and I understand that the concept of, well, I am advancing something, I'm improving the economy by making my product more eco-friendly. And you can't argue that. But again, I think it was David's point, where this is where a specialist would come in and say, okay, I understand where you think the innovation is there.
Yeah.
But from HMRC's point of view, you haven't made that advance. The can maker has made that advance, because the can maker has then taken recyclable material and made the product of the can, which you are now using. So you don't get to claim that innovation, the manufacturer does. Where you might get to jump in is if you go, well, we did purchase a can option, but we realised that we had to do tests on the shelf life, we had to do tests on the kind of ingredients that are going in the can, we had to make sure that it was durable, sustainable. We also wanted the manufacturer to produce us something that didn't use a particular type of material, because we found that material didn't zinc well with our ingredients. So this is I always find that the more questions around a project, and the more how we're going to do that, what's going to happen then, unsure of this risk mentality, the more times that concept comes up in a conversation, the more R&D is likely to take place. If something's easy, if something is literally a click of a button and you've got what you want and it works, that's just going shopping.
Fair. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I've actually had a question come in, but David's made a comment on the can situation, so I thought we'll come back to that quickly and then move on to the question. Um, I think the challenge with spirits in cans is sealing it and the different considerations to packaging wine cocktails. So I guess the level of testing and challenge means it may be suitable, but again, it's probably case by case basis. If you've had to do a lot of work into it to make it work, so you have had to risk something in a sense, then
Yeah,
yes, but if not, then no.
I mean, for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you found that there's a problem sealing the can,
Yeah.
and again you buy an off-the-shelf solution, you put that into your machine and it works, then you've bought something for the intention for it to do a job, and it does that job. So you've just bought something off the shelf to make the solution.
Yeah,
But if
yeah,
you went, well, there's a problem sealing the cans, there's no obvious solution right now as to how to fix it, we are going to have to get an engineer to come in, foot it about with our machinery, and we're going to have to see if this works with this piece of apparatus.
yeah,
Okay, didn't that piece, let's try that piece with apparatus.
yeah,
And I think again, when it comes to HMRC, you know, there's no guarantee that the person reading your report is going to know anything about the brewery sector. Okay, you might get someone who's an IT specialist reading your report, or you might get someone that does a lot of construction claims reading your report. So the concept of working with a specialist is between the two of you, you ultimately, join forces to showcase to HMRC, well, look, this is what my industry offers right now. This is the limitation to where I can go right now. And the limitation with these cans is there's problems with the sealing. And
yeah,
there's
yeah,
no particular easy off-the-shelf answer that I can just buy. So, Mr. HMRC, I've had to invest money in staff to research different options to overcome the problem. I've had to invest money with different materials, and we've had to throw half of those materials away because they didn't work.
yeah,
This is where we have to kind of showcase the story and say, well, I believe this is true innovation because X, Y, and Z.
yeah, yeah. That makes sense. That makes complete sense. I've got two questions now. Yay. Anonymous says, would this apply to innovation in your on-site visitor experience at your distillery? That's a tricky one. I suppose you'd have to be doing something different that's been difficult to set up, or there's been some trial and
Yeah.
error in getting it right, or in it's some sort of technique maybe, because showing people around your distillery, it would be
Mhm.
something everybody can do, right? So
Yeah, I think something that's important to bear in mind is HMRC are looking for either a scientific input or a technological input.
Mhm.
So when it comes to offering services, yes, there can be innovation in services, but there needs to be a connection somewhere to the science or technology behind the R&D. So I imagine in that case, let's say it was a brewery tour and the company have developed some sort of equipment that the attendees can use, and that they get to develop their own beer in 30 minutes,
Yeah,
and that's improving the experience of the customer, but actually the R&D there is this contraption that you've built to
yeah,
improve the experience. So that is a tricky one. That's definitely a case by case, but yeah, there needs to be some solid example of here's the boundary of the sector and here's why you've went above and beyond that boundary, and here was the issues in between with you getting
yes,
there.
yeah. That's a great answer. Thank you very much. Lovely. Moving on, we have oh, just quickly, David's just left a comment saying that's very helpful and a really nice, clear example of the required thinking. So that's really good. Because it's like you say, there's sort of a grey area, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
obviously it must be quite difficult to talk about because you don't want to say that something might be possible when it's not. So like you do have to be kind of careful, and it's very clear and concise. So thank you for that. Um,
Perfect.
we've got a question here from Avian who says, "Am I correct in thinking the tax credits are linked to PAYE bill for the business? How can a startup access these?"
Yeah, so basically, if you imagine a specialist you work with, they want to understand, first of all, what the projects are for the year that we're talking about, or the 2 years that we're talking about.
Mhm.
And then, based on those projects, we look at your set of accounts and we want to try and scrape as much money as possible from your accounts. And the areas that we can scrape money from is from PAYE, salaries. So naturally, I would say the bulk of a claim would come from the people involved because people cost money.
Yeah.
Now, many a time I've spoken to companies where the project of R&D is fantastic, but they don't pay themselves a penny. And unfortunately, if you don't pay yourself anything in regards to an R&D project and that pay isn't recorded anywhere, we can't use it. And unfortunately, we can't use dividends either. I know a lot of directors maybe take a very small salary and then a high dividend. HMRC just don't let us use the dividends. So we take money from salaries. We take money from, if you've used subcontractors, so you've worked with third parties, maybe, consultants, flavour experts, engineers, manufacturers, whatever. We take money from any externally provided workers, so possibly the agency workers that have come in that aren't on your PAYE, but they're through agency. Or it could be through maybe a connected party, so maybe you're part of a group company, and that you've kind of invoiced the parent company for some help, or you've invoiced a sister company for some help. We look at those costs. We look at things like have you purchased any particular software that's relevant to the project, and a big cost is consumables and wastage. So consumables will be things like your light, heat and power, a percentage of that, because you have to use that to get your project going, but also material wastage. So you guys have to buy ingredients in bulk, and there's it's not necessarily that all of those ingredients are going to be in the end product. You're probably going to find some of them along the way. You'll find out that batches you tried didn't work, so they get scrapped. And we take into consideration the money that's basically been put in the bin from your ingredients. So we take that, and we also take into consideration things like if you've had to purchase expensive plant and machinery. Now, that might be that you actually are eligible for a different claim called capital allowances, but I won't spend too much time on that. It just, bear it in mind. If you're purchasing, big expensive pieces of machinery, then bear that conversation. And then finally, we take into consideration, this is a bit of a caveat, this one, it's travel expenses. So let's say you have to keep traveling between, manufacturers or, suppliers of ingredients or whatever. You might even have to travel abroad. If you or your staff or your subcontractors, if they've paid for that travel through their own personal account, and then they expense it back through the company at the end of the month or end of the year, whatever, then we can actually include those costs. However, if, say, me as a staff member, I've been back and forth to the manufacturer for my boss 50 times this year, if I've paid for my mileage or my overnight accommodation or my flight through a company credit card or a mileage card, can't use the costs. So again, it's just a bit of knowledge in regards to if you are a very, very early startup and you're not too fussed on how you record your travel expenses, I'd maybe advise that you pay for them yourself and expense them back through the company.
That's really strong advice. So could you add to that, maybe people that are just getting started up, it might be worth a chat with you guys to sort of lay out how they should be doing things to make sure down the line they can then claim?
For sure. Yeah, I think, definitely the feedback from clients who have never done an R&D claim, or where the concept has been, I think I've heard about it, but I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
The first claim that they do is absolutely a journey, because they're having to get their head around what the concept R&D means. They're then having to get their head around, well, I'm not sure if this is included and we've done that part, and it can be quite overwhelming. So if you get started early and you get your head into the mindset of, right, here's a good activity, I'm going to keep a note of it. By the time it comes round to having a proper conversation, you've already got this list of things that you want to know off. And that specialist working with, you can go, yep, that counts. No, strike that one off. Yep, that's interesting. And it kind of just gets you straight away thinking, yeah, everything I've been doing this year, I've been pushing boundaries, I've been challenged with this. I couldn't find an answer for that straight away, so this is what I've done. The fact that you're just keeping an eye on your work, it will help you when it comes to claiming. But on that point, Bernadette, I would actually suggest that, again, it's unfortunate when an R&D project is there, but the spend isn't. So bear in mind, guys, that when you do claim this, you're basically claiming on money that you've already spent in the company. It's not kind of, you can't just allocate that you're worth 50k of a salary. You have to pay yourself that. So yeah, I would also possibly speak to your accountants to figure out, what is the most tax efficient way for me to pay myself a salary and be able to add that into my claim, or whatever
Yeah.
it may be.
That's brilliant. Thank you. That's absolutely brilliant. I hope that answers your question, Avian. We've had a follow up from one of the anonymous questions, the one asking about the visitor experience, and they've said, I think where we were looking at how you would do it differently and what would qualify, they've got perhaps creating an aroma experience to understand the different flavors, aroma notes of beer, which I suppose is an interesting concept and it's something different. But would they need some sort of, like, so the R&D, the technology behind it? Would there need to be something there to
Well,
qualify that, or?
I suppose before the visitors have even entered your brewery,
Mhm.
your team have had to work on that as a project. Aroma Senses, that's the project name.
Yes.
And, again, it's one thing having aromas in a brewery as the work is going on. It's another thing capturing that smell and making sure that that smell stays, and
Yeah,
making
yeah,
sure how have you managed to capture it? How have you managed to have 10 different individual smells where this, client can come in and have a whiff, and, the next client can come along and have a whiff, and it
yeah,
doesn't, so that's where the R&D would be. It wouldn't be the customer actually getting to enjoy the experience. It would be
yeah.
the experience is the R&D. So that could be quite an interesting one that would be interesting to talk to you about, because I'd like to know how that works.
Yeah. Absolutely curious.
Like walking into, I don't know, Cadbury or something and smelling the orange, and then smelling the strawberry, and then smelling the caramel.
Yeah, totally. Because I mean, keeping smells is big business. It's like
Yeah.
with perfume. I can't remember the name of it, but technically it's whale sick, but it is worth a fortune because it's like one of the most solid fixatives, and perfume companies pay so much money for it. And you can
There
just
you
find
go.
it on the beach sometimes, and it's just like this waxy substance, but they literally pay thousands and thousands of pounds for it. So it's a bit off topic there. Sorry.
No, do you know, even with that, I was speaking to a cosmetic client the other day,
Mm,
and her R&D is basically investigating when, say, a mascara says it's waterproof, and then
yes.
tests it on, say, athletes who are in the water a
Yeah.
lot, and
Yeah.
she realizes that it's not waterproof. Her R&D is actually in the breakdown of components within the mascara to
Yeah.
figure out, okay, well, if we take this element out and we replace it with that, does that change the outcome? Right? It doesn't. Let's
Yeah.
take this element out and merge it with that ingredient. Let's see if that changes things. Let's see if it makes it last longer. So again,
Yes.
I reckon as much as that's in the cosmetic sector, that will be in, this one as well.
Well, it's a similar thing actually, because obviously with spirits, they need fixatives in a sense. I'm sorry, I'm just looking up this word that David's put forward, which I think may be to do with the fixative stuff. Sorry. So essentially, I think it was Ian Hart mentioned yesterday, Oris is sort of renowned as being used in gin as a fixative to help it keep its flavour for longer. And he started to suspect it doesn't actually really do that. And it just contributes to the flavour. It kind of gives this warm, earthy, spicy, sweet kind of note to it. But
Mhm.
it's interesting because, if you, for one, if you're producing a product, if it's all sealed, it's not so bad. But if there's air, it's still going to lose some of its stuff while it's in storage waiting to be sold. And obviously, for people that have bought it, if they only go to it every now and again, they'll get less and less off it each time, unless it's got a good fix in it. So I suppose if you did research there to develop a good thing, that would be something that you could.
Well, for sure, because essentially there you're looking at what the industry offers you as a product, as it is, and you're actually investigating, well, how reliable is that product? How true is that product? And
Yeah,
actually you find that the product isn't as, true as it's supposed to be. Well, you then start to go, well, I'd like to make it as true as it's supposed to be. I'd like to actually, the industry standard says that this has X in it, but
yeah,
actually we found that it doesn't really have X. So we would like to now make a product that does have X.
yes,
You know, and that's kind of where the journeys begin. That's where the curiosities begin, and And that's where the trial and testing and the experimentation and the
Yeah.
phases and the failed projects take place. That's a point actually I should make as well, Bernie.
Mhm.
There's a huge amount of failed projects where, you know, you've got an idea, you've got a concept, you try and make that concept come to life. After 3 months, 4 months, 5 months of work, you find out that, you know what, it just can't be done. Every time we try and make this strawberry gin, it's got pips of strawberry in it. We've tried everything we can possibly think, and it doesn't work. So let's just scrap it. Within those 3, 4, 5 months, you've allocated time there, you've allocated money, staff, ingredients, equipment, lighting, heating, etc. All those costs you can still put in a claim, because the whole concept of the project failing actually reiterates the HMRC that the uncertainty, that technological uncertainty,
Yeah.
is completely correct. It didn't work, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of and this is, yeah, again, speaking to a specialist, this is where we come in and say, right, we've talked about all the stuff that did work that year. Let's talk about the stuff that didn't work, because we eliminate anything.
That's brilliant. I'm so glad you picked up on that and said that, because I think that's really important for people to know. So, I mean, essentially, you know, if you're into distilling, you think you might be looking to claim stuff like this down the line, you really just need to be keeping your budgets and proof of where the money's been spent for each project you do. And then if it fails, you put in claim. If it doesn't fail, if you've gone through those steps where you've been at risk by doing it and it's innovative, then it's worth putting in a claim as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant.
I think even, sorry, if is there any other question there?
Yeah, I know you're okay for the minute. You're absolutely fine. Crack on.
I was just going to add on as well. I don't know if it's a Scottish thing, or if, I don't know, maybe we're just a wee bit more modest up here, but a lot of the companies that I speak to, when I ask them, right, how difficult was that to do? A lot of the time the response is, well, you know, it was a wee bit hard, but, you know, we done it. You know, we got there. We done it in the end. And actually, maybe it might be that they don't want to admit that it was actually quite tricky.
Yeah.
Or maybe the subcontractor that they worked with didn't want the client to know that they were struggling. So the subcontractor just said, no, it was fine. It was easy. You know, I done it in the end.
Yeah.
But, you know, what might be easy to you might not be easy to the industry, might not be easy to the standard way of doing things.
Yeah.
So what you might find simple to do, your next door neighbour who's in the same sector as you, that might be mind-boggling to them.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is where, again, we want to understand, okay, how did you get the knowledge to do that? You know, have you literally been in this sector for 25, 40 years and you've done it a million times before and it's worked? Or has this been an accumulation of knowledge that you've taken from 10 projects and now you're trying to merge this knowledge together into a new project?
Yeah.
Because as much as, you know, that's 10 individual experiences that you've been part of that you're now trying to merge into one new experience, how difficult is that going to be? And, you know, and actually it's funny when you break down a project, you then get the conversations like, well, I tell you what, when that part didn't work, you know, we just thought, no, we can't even go on with this. And, you know, the can of worms kind of opens.
Yeah.
But you start to realise that, you know, the client will then say, God, actually, we then had to buy this piece of equipment and that didn't work. You know, or, you know, we then had to purchase X amount of ingredients and half of that was put in the bin. You know, and this is where the conversation unravels, really.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. It's not worth the modesty. Just say.
Yeah. So just basically, the more challenged you were as a company, that's what HMR want to see. Yeah,
that's great. I'm going to just say we've got 5 minutes left. So been loving the conversation so far. If anybody has got any further questions, now is the time to ask them. I think maybe I know you do go through this in the pre-recorded, and you know, if anybody watching now that hasn't seen it, you can obviously go back and watch the pre-recorded as well, and I heartily advise you do. It might just be worth touching on the sort of application process a little bit, if that's okay. I'm trying to remember from before, and I believe you said that they can apply separately, but obviously going through a consultant is going to be a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, you know, look, guys, this is all about, you know, learning about this topic. So you've got a few options when claiming R&D. The first option is your accountant may be an expert in this field. Now, if it's taken you coming on this conversation to learn about this topic, it would tell me that your accountant doesn't specialise in R&D. Otherwise, they would have said to you or, done a claim for you already. But it could be your accountant is completely qualified to do R&D claims, and they might charge you by the hour, or they might just add it into your annual bill. But your accountant can be a way to go forward. The second way is to work with a specialist, so a third party who do nothing but submit claims to HMRC. That's their day-to-day job, that's their bread and butter. They do it, every minute of every day. So, you should feel confident that who you're working with knows what they're doing, what HMRC look for, how to structure reports, etc.
Yeah.
Specialists tend to work on a contingency basis, so you'll typically, no win, no fee is what gets thrown around, and it pretty much is that. They try and maximise the claim, they try and get as high a number as possible back for you, and from that number, each of you get a cut, and it varies, throughout businesses.
Yeah.
Another option would be that you work with a specialist and you pay an upfront fee. And then you pay a smaller fee at the end once the money comes back. Now, it's entirely up to you how you wish to run your business. My advice would be not to go for that option, especially if it's your first time doing it. When you pay an upfront amount, if you imagine that's me and you pay me $5,000, initially, well, I don't really need to push your claim then because I've already made $5,000.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I'll still do my job professionally, but I'm not really going to be looking into every nook and cranny to try and maximise your claim because I've already been paid, half my money.
Yeah.
That tends to be, what I hear, but again, it's entirely up to you what you want to look at. And the other option would be that you can do this yourself. There are websites out there where you can actually submit your own R&D claim. You just type in the details, answer the questions. And the fee can be tiny, like 5 or 10% of the overall, benefit that comes back.
Yeah.
But the issue with doing that is, it's essentially like going to a GP and, telling them that you need knee surgery. That GP would refer you on to a specialist, or would you just kind of, if the GP told you, here's the steps you do to do it yourself, would you do it yourself, or would you go to a specialist? It's one of those things where if you're very confident with this sector, if you've done it 20 times, if you know what HMRC look for, then there is a super cheap way to do it, and that's yourself. But if you haven't done this before, if it's not really something you're sure on, you do not want to come across as amateur to HMRC. You also certainly don't want to overclaim or underclaim. And you certainly don't want to be creating your report in a way where it makes you look like a first-time claimer, because those are the claims that will be scrutinised. And if it hasn't come through a reputable, agent who submit, for example, Catax submit 200 claims a month to HMRC. Yeah. So if you're this one-man band and you send a report versus an agent that sends bulk reports, those are the kind of differences where you might go, do you know what, it's worth it paying the extra money. But yeah, so there's a few different options. Do your homework, I would suggest. You will be bombarded with every man and his dog saying that they want to do your R&D claim.
Yeah.
Nature of the beast. My advice there is just do your homework, make connections with people you want to learn more about, get to know, what they're like through webinars, what they're like through case studies.
Yeah.
I would say if through the pandemic, there's been a huge amount of agencies opening up, and they're, 4 months, 6 months, a year old. And it's because they have realised that companies are wanting tax back, and this is a surefire way to get some money. Yeah. So, again, it's your call, but just sort of take your time with it, unless you literally are up against the deadline where you need to get a report in and you need to make a decision fast. Take your time.
Perfect. Oh, that's brilliant. And that is beautifully taken us. Thank you so much, Karen. It's always a pleasure. So informative, lots of really good information for everybody, and you explain it in such an understandable way, because it can be baffling. Sure. And thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
No, pleasure. Everybody, I'm on LinkedIn as well, so just please feel free to connect with me there.
Fab. Good stuff. Well, we're gonna go now, but stay online. We have our next talk at midday. EU gin regulations. I believe the full title of it, I'm just going to look it up here. We have EU gin regulations, the new EU gin regulations, a closer look. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, then stick on and we'll be on at 12. Thank you so much again, Karen. You
No
take care, look
worries.
after yourself.
Thanks, guys. Bye bye. Take care.
Bye.